And we'll go again from the top. Hello, Twitch and YouTube. Welcome to my replay review stream of the Vintage Showcase Qualifier. We'll give a little background on what this event is, and then we'll go through a deck tech, a metagame analysis, and then we'll watch the replays and see if we can learn anything, if we can do things better next time, if I just ran super hot. Probably a mixture of all three. So the Vintage Showcase Qualifier is the third event in a string of qualifying events for the Magic Online Showcase Championship. You start by playing leagues and preliminaries to gain qualifier points, and then you use your qualifier points to enter a once monthly 3 in a season showcase event. If you top 8 the showcase event, you get invited to this event, which is a showcase qualifier. So this is basically up to 24, maybe 25, if depending on how the numbers fell, of the best vintage players who top 8'd a showcase, basically. And this field is stacked. Like, this field is absolutely stacked. Like, these are a ton of people who are vintage specialists or Hall of Famers or just like really, really strong players. And so this tournament is it's not really a winner takes all, but the winner has the majority of the big prizes, and what you win is like 600 tickets worth of Magic Online stuff and an invite to the next Pro Tour, or I guess Players Tour or Split Championship, whatever the hell they're called now. So that's an arena, right now it's an arena standard event, I would assume, near the end of the year. And the more important invite to the Magic Online Championship, it was called Magic Online Championship Series, now I think it's called Champion Showcase, the MOX, which will be an 8-player, invite only, in Seattle, like, coveraged MTGO tournament, where 8th place is $5,000 and first place is $20,000. So the finals match of this tournament was like a match for at least $5,000, which is really, really stupid. The more I think about it, the more fucking crazy that is. I had to play a one match of Magic versus a Hall of Fame, like a really, really powerful wizard, Hall of Famer Reduke, for $5,000. I don't think I want to put myself. I mean, I want to be in that situation, but at the same time, it's like really crazy. So that is what this event was. So you can see the field here. So one of the interesting things about this event is because it's 21 players, invite only, and you know what decks your opponents have qualified with, and you know what decks they play because Magic Online produces results, you can kind of get a pretty good view of what you think you're going to play against. So that's like the first thing I did. The first thing I did was I put a spreadsheet together, and I tried to guess what my opponents were playing and make a, somewhat accurate prediction on what the metagame would look like. And some of these players are deck specialists. Miharu, I would say she's the best Oath player on Magic Online, maybe the best Oath player in the world. Singpipe one of the better Doomsday pilots. Like, these players are going to 100% play their Doomsday and Oath decks. IB True is never not going to play a Xerox deck. What was another one? And Bryant is never not going to play PO. So, like, from just that alone, you can pick a couple of these decks that you know that they're going to play. Then you can check what deck they qualified with, what decks you see them play typically, and you can make a prediction on what you think they're going to do. So my prediction looked like a very blue heavy metagame where there would be maybe a lot of Doomsday, and then a couple spread out combo decks between PO and Breach and DPS and that kind of stuff. And how right was I? Well, I was pretty correct. This is like these aren't super accurate numbers, they're kind of just put together, but I ended up predicting like 13 of the 20 opponents' decks. 13 of the 21 opponents' decks. So, like, reasonable amount. And the big thing that I missed on was, instead of a bunch of the pilots who queued with Doomsday playing Doomsday, they switched to Breach because Breach should be better versus Doomsday. Most of the people in this tournament predicted that there'd be a lot of Doomsday, so they kind of switched off it and played Breach. which is sometimes similar tech cards for the two matchups. So basically, what actually happened was what we thought would happen, which is a big pile of blue soup with no dredge, and then just a splattering of shops and oath, and yeah, and one very very bold humans pilot. So we basically took a prediction, and we ended up being pretty close, and so that's how we shaped our deck building, right? So from there, I have to choose a deck, and for this tournament, I thought, like a lot of other people, I might play Breach because it's good versus Doomsday. It's just a powerful deck in general. But I just ended up having some really poor testing with Breach. I don't think I was very good at it. I didn't feel like I was quite good at the deck. So I had some ideas to play like a humans deck, maybe a deck with Mindbreak traps, to play around the combo meta. But in the end, I was like, I am the most comfortable with my pet deck, my PO deck. I just feel a lot better about my level of play when I play PO, and that's because I put in like 2+ years of effort becoming a better PO player. So instead of trying to pick a deck to target the metagame, what I did was take my deck and I converted it to be good against the metagame. And so we can try to this is the deck list that I played. Hopefully you can see the whole thing on stream. You can kind of see the whole thing on stream. And so I'm going to go over what we did to this deck list to make it better versus my perceived metagame. And so the best way to do that is to look at the list I qualified with. So I top-8'd a showcase with this Esper list. And this Esper list is a pretty generic, well, I guess it's no longer generic. So there was a time where Esper was the go-to PO list. That's no longer true. I think the stock PO list is actually Bryant Cook's list, which I think is not without reason, right? I think his list is very strong. And I'll bring that up on stream just so you know what a stock PO list looks like right now. I didn't have that one prepared. Sorry. So this is kind of what a stock PO list looks like right now. It's 4 colors. It fits red for 2 Pyroblasts in the main, and then lightning bolts for collector oofs and sprite dragons in the board as a pivot matchup, pivot game plan. And I think this list is good, and I'm not gonna. Brian has put a lot of work into it, and I think there's a reason that this deck is good against an open field. My biggest problem is that I don't like Pyroblast in PO. The Sprite Dragon tested horribly for me, but I could have been boarding it in wrong. And I think the Pyroblast is good, but I personally don't like it in PO because it doesn't solve what it doesn't help you resolve POs typically. It does counter Force of Will and Force of Negation, but it doesn't counter other Pyroblasts, and it doesn't counter Flusterstorms. And so it's actually really hard sometimes to use a Pyroblast to push your PO through. What you end up doing with Pyroblast is a lot of the time you use it to stop your opponent from doing something. And I'm not that's just not really the mentality that I use when I play PO. I want the opponent to try to be stopping me, and I want my spells to try to go through, right? And so I don't think the Pyroblast is bad. In fact, I think it's probably good in PO. But it's just a personal thing where I don't like what having a Volcanic Island does to the deck in terms of weakening your mana base, and I don't like having a bunch of Pyroblasts in my deck. So I typically tend to make these Esper lists, and by doing so, you get 2 islands to play versus the Wasteland decks and shops, which is fantastic. And then you get some more flexibility with not having to play Pyroblast in your deck. So this is the list I qualified with. It's a pretty generic, in my mind, Esper list that hits a lot of the field. You're playing your Hercules Recall, and you're playing your Lavinia's and Teferi for combo. You're playing a Repeal as a catch-all. Karn was kind of for the mirror at the time. I'm not sure. I'm still not sure if this is great. It felt pretty good sometimes, and sometimes it feels really bad. I had some preordains, but not a full set of preordains. And so this is kind of what a normal, for me, Esper list looks like. And then for this tournament, we changed it up a little bit. And I wanted to make my deck as good against blue as I possibly could while sacrificing the Dredge and Shops matchups, basically. And not sacrificing, because those are still winnable matchups, but I'm taking a different game plan than normal against them. So one of the first things you'll notice is that Hurkyl's Recall is no longer in the deck, and we don't have 4 Hurkyl's Recall in the 75. I do kind of supplement that a little by putting some artifact hate in the board, but I definitely made my Shops matchup weaker by doing this. And the only reason I really did it is because I wanted to just get more slots. And for Dredge, I just have no Dredge hate in my entire deck. So like Lavinia and Teferi, those are kind of splash hate for Dredge. But my plan is to just combo kill them, or put a Blightsteel into play, one of the two. And I just didn't expect Dredge in this field, so I just didn't think that it was worth it to, put 4 or 5 sideboard slots for Dredge. There's even like some, debate in the PO community that you don't even want to bring in sideboard cards for Dredge because it's like hurting your game plan and actually not, very good against the Dredge opponents. So that's worth considering too. So if we put like the flex cards to the side, 1, 2, these guys, and you can consider some of these other cards flex cards, like you don't always include these cards in your list, but these are like full flex, and then these are like typically you might have them but you might not. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to make sure I had a Lavinia, because I do think Lavinia is very good against Doomsday, and Lavinia is pretty good in a combo meta, as is Teferi. And so these are kind of stock to have one of each of these. I basically opted for Night's Whispers over Preordains, and I think Night's Whisper is much better in PO than Preordain. And the reason is you're almost always going to have one of these Moxen, these off-color Moxen. So a lot of these games you do have 2 mana on turn 1, and you can always fetch for your black source. When you don't have to fetch for a Volcanic Island, it gets a little bit easier too. And PO is a deck that you really want a lot of cards. You need a quantity of cards to make your Paradoxical Outcomes work. So drawing 2 cards is like far superior than scrying 2 and drawing 1. And when you don't care about your life total, like I was expecting maybe 3 creature decks in the 20-player field, against these combo decks, your life total doesn't matter. Your life total is a resource, so who gives a shit if you take 2 life? It gets a little dicey off of Bolas' Citadel because it costs 4 life, but I think you just live with that. So obviously we have Night's Whispers instead of Preordains, and I think this was just like a really good call. It's I like to play these, Echo Baron likes to play these, and then Not Me suggested make sure that I was playing these, which I think is great. Obviously, I think I like a Fluster in the main, pretty much in general. I think Fluster's really good in Vintage right now. All the decks are really high power. There's a lot of blue decks. Fluster just hits everything, and being able to get Fluster off of Merchant Scroll is very important. This is the list we ended up playing yesterday for sure. Yep. And then the reason I'm playing a Mystical Tutor is because I just want my deck to be fast. I want to be able to tinker a lot, and I want to... This kind of helps supplement those matchups that I weakened. Like, you want a Mystical and a Vampiric against, like, Shops so that you can find your Tinker more often and put a Blightsteel in play. So I wanted to put both tutors. You'll notice I board them out a lot. I think the slow tutors are really bad versus other blue decks, besides, like, trying to, like, sneak a game. So you'll see when we do boarding that I board them out a lot. And then this is like the big all in the tech. I'm playing 2 Remoras in the main for this tournament. And then this card is just a complete beating against any kind of blue deck, any kind of combo deck that uses spells. Not creature spells. You just plop this in play. It's typically a must counter because there's no deck that plays as much fast mana as PO. If I play this on Island, you might be like, oh, I wonder if he'll be able to, continue paying for it. I can always continue paying for it. I want to sequence this first to give you as little information, and then just drop a bunch of Moxen, and then this is going to be in play for the rest of the game. It eats a Pyroblast a lot, which is nice, because your other spells need to resolve, and all your spells are blue, basically. This is a card that saw some play in 2019 and 2018 when I was working on, like, heavy PO metas where there was a lot of PO going around. There were like, it was just a kind of, it was almost a blue soup like we kind of have now. So I played it a lot a couple years ago, and then it went away, when PO started playing 4-color, and then it came back when Luris was printed, because this card is just really, really dumb with Luris. And so this card was like actually really oppressive with Luris, so you could just always bring it back. It was really, you basically didn't have a cost, and it was really not very fun to play against. It can make interesting games and interesting game theory, but sometimes can be very frustrating to play against. As Dan notes, it's also really cool because once this cumulative upkeep starts getting higher, you can just, in your upkeep, Paradoxical Outcome it and your Moxen, and you won't even have to pay for the cost. So it has some pretty good synergy in the deck. The thing that I was finding was a lot of the times you're going to tap out when you have a Remora, and you basically want to be able to have a force of will to counter your opponent's spells, because when an opponent sees you tap out, they're like, well, I can't get rid of this Remora, so I have to kind of combo through the Remora. If they're tapped out, it means the only thing they can do is force me. So what I did was I included a 5th free counterspell, and we're playing a Mindbreak Trap in the main. I don't think I've ever seen a PO list play a Mindbreak Trap in the main. I could be wrong. I don't think I ever have. But I felt like Mindbreak Trap was the next best free counter, and that's for a couple reasons. One, it's a combo meta this tournament. I expected Doomsday, I expected Breach, and this card is very good against both of those decks. Not very good. It's good against both of those decks. And another thing is that you can cast it off of Bolas's Citadel, and it doesn't brick you. So one of the problems PO has is technically not a good Bolas Citadel deck sometimes. Sometimes you have cards and you just can't keep comboing. And if you hit like a Force of Negation off the Citadel, you're stuck. And we'll actually see this a couple times in the tournament. But the cool part about Mindbreak Trap is it's exile any number of spells, so any number can be 0. So basically, I could pay 4 life to remove it from the top of my library if I want to. It's a small thing, but it is actually a big deal. It comes up more than you would think. And so I think this is like the big one. And then I could have chose like Repeal or another Lavinia, but what I did is I chose another Teferi. And the reason I chose that is because this card is very good against Doomsday. Repeal is my typical catch-all answer in Esper PO. Sometimes I play as many as 2 Repeals, but I didn't think I needed Repeals in the metagame that I was predicting. So we put a Teferi instead. And then we move to the sideboard, and the sideboard probably gets maybe a little too techy, but let's go over it real quick. Caracas, I have no way really to deal with Lavinias. Like, I have a really bad problem with Lavinias and Leovolds. So you kind of need to play a Caracas in this deck in the sideboard. It does double up really nice because it bounces Hogak, and that actually comes up a couple times in this video, this tournament as well. So I'm really happy with the Caracas in the board. I might even want one in the 4-color list. I'm not 100% sure. Blightsteel is a very common. I always include it in my Esper lists. Basically, Blightsteel helps you in a set of matchups that you struggle in with Citadel. So like Force of Vigor matchups, you'll bring in Blightsteel as an additional Tinker target. Dredge, Shops, the creature decks. Like, no creature deck is bigger than a Blightsteel. So you just want to kind of jam a Blightsteel versus Shops, and then Shops is like, what do I do? Die. No, this is probably the only card in the sideboard that I think was wrong. This card, and it might not even be wrong. It's very specific why I wanted this card. I wanted this card specifically for the Doomsday matchup, which I didn't end up playing against. And the theory behind it is, against Doomsday, you can't ever tap out. So I want to be able to hold up my counter spells. And this has Flash, so I can flash in at the end of their turn if they didn't try to combo. And the reason I like this kind of card versus Doomsday is because, one, it prevents them from comboing, really. Their Doomsday combo, typically, you need to draw some cards to get to your Thassa's Oracle after you Doomsday. Or you're drawing a lot, you're a Xerox deck, so you're drawing a bunch of cards to get to your Doomsday combo. And this card obviously stops that. And what I really like is that Doomsday doesn't have ways to deal with permanents right now. They play 1 Chain of Vapor, typically. It's not like they play any Pyroblast in their deck. So any kind of one of these like hateful permanents resolving, like a Lavinia or a Teferi or a Ocean Thief, is going to be really hard for them to remove, especially because if they need to draw to their Chain of Vapor with an Ocean Thief or like a Narset in play, it's really hard for them because they can't draw extra cards. And then Camball was fantastic. This is a very classic Esper PO sideboard card. I'll answer the questions at the end. So once we get through the sideboard, then we can answer questions on the list, if you guys don't mind. So save the questions for just like 2 minutes from now. Camball is a really typical, actually, 2019 Esper PO sideboard card. It kind of fell out of favor when people started playing like more Caracas and Lightning Bolts. It really fell out of favor because like Luris made all decks play Caracas, and this card is terrible versus Caracas. But this card was fantastic all day. The big thing about Camball is it doesn't die to Pyroblast, and your red opponents are typically boarding out their Lightning Bolts, which leaves them very few ways for them to kill the Camball. If you can get it in early enough for Doomsday, theoretically it's going to be hard for them to combo off. It's great against Breach. It's great against PO. It's great against all these blue combo decks. Camball was a house, and I was really happy with Camball. I did put the second Lavinia in the board. I considered it in the main, but I really hate having 2 Lavinias in the main. It's a dead draw a lot of the times, but I really wanted it for Doomsday. And sometimes I brought it in versus the blue decks. I don't like it a ton versus the blue decks because it's so bad against Pyroblast, but even any spell that eats a Pyroblast is okay in PO because you kind of need you just have to run through their Pyroblast a lot of the time. Speaking of Pyroblast, we did play a Hydroblast. I expected a bunch of Breach, and I think Hydroblast is super good versus Breach. It's very good against the Jeskai decks as well with like Arcanist. So I was really happy with this card for the whole tournament, basically. It's Flusterstorm doesn't hit Underworld Breach, and that's actually a really big problem. So this card actually filled a bunch of holes, and I was really happy with it. 2 Flusterstorm, just it's a combo meta. I want to bring in Flusterstorms. 3 Hurkles, which is 1 Hurkle less than I would ever play in any PO deck. Typically I play 1 in the main and 3 in the board. But I just, like I said, I expected 2 shops. I expected 2 shops players, and I said I would rather make my blue matchup better than. And I don't know if it was right, but I took the Hurkles out of the main and I didn't put it in the board. This is basically just for shops. Against the shops matchup, you like either want to put a Blightsteel into play or like end of turn Hurkles them and then PO combo. I did keep some creature removal, especially for like Hogak or a possible Eldrazi or Humans player. So we have 1 Swords and 1 Balance. And then these were originally Containment Priest, but I found that Containment Priest was too narrow. It's not actually very good against like Hogak decks. It's only okay versus Dredge. And I was like doing it out of respect for Diem and Miharu, who are the 2 Oath players in the tournament. But I decided to try to find a different spell that kind of fit that role, but helped me out in other places. And so there's a reason we did Disenchant over Fragmentize. And the reason is I wanted Disenchant to be good in the Hogak matchup. So the cool thing about Disenchant in the Hogak matchup is that there are 4 Deafening Silences in the Hogak deck, but there are also 4 hollow ones. And sometimes you just need to kill a hollow one to have enough time to do things. And so Disenchant hitting both hollow one and Deafening Silence was really important to me. Obviously, Disenchant hits Oath of Druids, which is great. And it hits all of shops, which is great. This was kind of a last minute addition. Jacob brought up that Nature's Chant could have been better, and I initially agreed with him because the cool thing about Nature's Chant is I can cast it off of Emerald. But someone on Twitter brought up the bad part about Nature's Chant is this doesn't hit Stonecoil Serpent because Stonecoil Serpent is pro multicolor. And normally that wouldn't be a huge issue because I'm playing like 2 repeals in my deck, but I'm playing no repeals in this deck, only Teferis, which is also pro Teferi. And so I actually think after further review, Disenchant was the correct call over Nature's Chant due to me playing no repeals in my deck, which is kind of cool. Like it's kind of interesting that there's an option, right? So yeah, Fragmentize also gets hit by Mental Misstep and Chalice on 1, which are both concerns, but not always the biggest deal. So I'm going to go through anyone's questions about the deck now. I saw some up before. Thank you guys for the congratulations. I really appreciate that. Rattled Snake asks, any consideration on Sideboard Cavern? Yes. There was actually a deck I was working on for the last Vintage Showcase. It's a PO deck that sideboards into humans. And I have put caverns in my sideboard. I've considered caverns in my sideboard, and I've actually played caverns in my main and sideboard for like the amount of humans. This is a little low for the number of humans I would like to play a cavern for, but it's definitely a consideration. Unbanned Mental Misstep asked what about Torpor Orb. I think Torpor Orb's kind of narrow. I'm not a huge Torpor Orb fan. Like maybe it's better than Ocean Thief, but well, the reason you play this is one of the upsides of Fragmentize is that it costs 1 mana. It's also one of the downsides of Fragmentize, but in Vintage there's a Workshop deck, and Workshops typically play Sphere of Resistance to make your spells cost more mana. So this Disenchant's going to cost like 3 or 4 mana a lot of the time, which is sometimes too much mana. So that would be like a reason that you would want Fragmentize, and people have played Fragmentize in the PO slots before. Piero asked, will you replay the matches? We're going to be doing that right after we talk about the deck. So soon, very soon. I just want to let people field any more questions they have about the deck. I think all of the rest of the choices inside the deck are pretty typical stock PO, so I don't really want to explain them. 13 lands. This deck, you'll see me board out a land a lot. PO operates on 12 or less lands. The only reason people play 13 and 14 lands is because shops exist. It's only because shops and other wasteland decks exist. So what you'll see a lot of the time when I sideboard, and I don't think the MTGO replays show sideboarding, so we're going to have to kind of do that manually. And I'll show you, like, I'll just move the deck over and we'll show you sideboarding. But a lot of the times I'll sideboard out this island. Against the blue decks, you'll see me, because people like to attack your mana base, not your mana base, your Moxen base. I'll sideboard like Island, Opal, Slow Tutor. And I actually think the sideboard plan worked pretty well for this tournament. It was pretty well thought out compared to sometimes when I just jump into tournaments. Oh man. All right, any Disenchant is an instant help versus Deafening Silence. That's true too, for sure. I do think Disenchant was lit. I was really happy with Disenchant. Okay, alright, that's good. I haven't done one of these replay streams with Magic Online replays before, so I appreciate that. In a general meta, would I add a Hercules and a Repeal main? Absolutely. My general meta deck would look more like this deck. I don't know about Karn, so that might change. I'd probably take this this Lavinia out and put a Mystical Tutor in. And I would keep the Hercules, and I would keep a Repeal. And I just like wouldn't have all of those cards. And these might still be Night's Whispers. Actually, I have three draw spells. Interesting. Yeah, I think that the basic thing you'd see if I made this deck not targeted for a blue meta is I would take these 4 cards out and put different cards in. You can go back and look at it. Mind of a Kid, it'll be in the replay, but it's basically a blue soup combo meta. So, and we predicted that, and it was very accurate. So, all right, I think that's all for the deck tech portion. Let's just jump into game.